Now I want to show you a demo of how DevOps database development can work in an entire stack. So I want to make changes that will flow from my development environment all the way through to production. Let's orient you with my environment to start with. If I zoom in here, you'll notice I have a 2014 instance and a 2016 instance here. On my 2014 instance, I have a development database, which would typically be on my laptop or my workstation. This is where I'll perform all of my development. I'll make all my changes to my own branch, and I'll merge those into our main line of code. From there, we'll actually get those changes deployed out to an integration database automatically. After my CI process is completed, it's built and tested my code, it's sure everything works, it will deploy to integration. And then I'll use my release management tool. So I'll actually manually deploy to my QA server here. Once that's done, I'll deploy to a staging server, which mimics my production server. And this is actually going to occur on a different instance of SQL Server. In this case, actually even a different version of SQL Server. But since my code is version independent, I can deploy to my different version. And finally, once this is done, we'll continue to deploy this out to our production server, which actually exists in Azure. We've got a database.windows.net address, and we've got a database where we're going to deploy those changes automatically using an entire DevOps process without me having to introduce any manual changes along the way. So let's get started. Here I'm connected to my database development server. I've got this colored as purple, and it's my SimpleTalk Demo Dev database. I'm going to make a couple of changes. First, I'm going to alter a table, and we'll add a couple of columns to support a change we want to make. And then we'll add a piece of data to one of our lookup tables. This is our reference data, and we want to be sure that this is deployed to all the different environments. Now I need to store my code in a version control system. And to do that, I'm going to use a little bit of tooling that makes life easier, but all this is doing is capturing my code. As you can see here, my data change results in just a new row being inserted. And my table change shows the difference between what I've made in my development database and what exists in version control right now. So we've added these two new columns. As with any change, I want to add a comment. In this case, I'm going to link it to a particular work item. And let's commit that change. Once that change is committed, it's committed to my branch, and I want to push this out to my centralized version control system. In this case, that's in Visual Studio Team Services, and I'm using a Git interface to access that. So let's push our code. Our code is pushed, and let's take a look at version control. In my version control system, I actually have an application and my database code separated. And if I check, we'll see that I just committed something here. In fact, here's the comment that I added. We had two changes there. We had a data change, which is shown here on this line. And it's the same comment. And then we had a table change where we altered the table. If we wanted to, we could actually look in here and see the actual changes that were made. In this case, we changed the users table. And I can see my code change with those additional columns added. Now, this was done in my own branch. Hopefully I've tested it. I'm sure my application works. So let's create a pull request. And we'll submit this to our master branch of code where it will then be built and tested. In this case, I create the pull request. And once that's complete, it should be approved and it should be reviewed by other users. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to go ahead and improve my own code. And then I'm going to complete this request. I can add any additional comments or information I want here, but let's go ahead and complete that merge. Once that's done, I've moved all my code together, and we're ready for the CI process to take over. If I go to my CI process, we'll see that it's actually in progress right now. My process is actually running build 440. And if I click through, I can actually see the console output from the agent that I have running that's actually building and testing this code on its own SQL Server. This is actually an agent running on my machine, but it could be running on any server in my data center or even a VM in the Azure cloud or a container. In this case, the same code that the agent is running and all the same output that we're receiving, all the login and telemetry, is what's actually being stored back on Visual Studio Team Services. So I can watch it in real time, even if it's not running on my machine. How is this build actually working? Let's look at the definition. I can edit the build, and you'll see that I have a number of steps on the left-hand side. I actually get my source code, I perform a build, a test, a sync, and a publish, just like we show you in this course. And for each of these steps, there's various configuration items that I would need to set and program, but all of this is custom design. I start with a blank template on Visual Studio Team Services. I add the tasks and configure them as appropriate to perform my build and release. When we return to the build, we'll see that it has succeeded and all my tests have passed, shown by the green check mark. So let's now release this code. Here's the release system in Visual Studio Team Services. In this case, you'll see I have a number of releases where I've been releasing code. Some of these have worked and some of these have not, but that's fine. Let's create a new release. In this case, I'm releasing on my mobile machine, so let's create a new release based on that last build. So you can see here I can choose which build from my CI system I'm going to release. In this case, I'm going to choose the latest one, but I certainly could choose previous ones if I wanted to. Let's now create this release, and you'll notice this will automatically deploy to QA after release. There's an automatic approval that performs that release. The release has been created, and what we'll see here is that the release is actually running. My deployment to QA is actually in progress, and just as we saw before, my agent is running, and it's go ahead and creating that release, and then it's going to deploy it to that new system. We'll let this run in the background, and we'll actually take a look at how this release is structured. If I edit my definition, what we'll see is that my QA environment has the two-step release process, where I'm going to do a create and then a deploy. But I have separate environments here. My staging environment actually has 3 steps, the first of which is a restore from production. And then my Azure deploy only has 2 steps, but I have 2 older steps that are disabled. If I go back to my release, we'll see that the first release is actually completed. Let's go ahead and deploy this further to staging because we're confident that it's working. Notice in this case, I have a list of items that tell me the structure of this release, and in this case, I actually have an approver. Once I say deploy, you'll notice that I get a pre-approval step is pending, and it has to be approved. In this case, for the purposes of demonstration, I am the one that has to approve this, so I'll go ahead and approve that code and let it go. And now my deployment to staging will start, and we'll let that run, and in the meantime, I'm going ahead and approve a deployment to the Azure database as well. We'll let these run in the background. Let's go check our system. Now in our QA system, we didn't perform any code changes here, but we just let the automated build and release process deploy those changes. So when I run these queries, we'll see that my users table has the modified date and modified by columns added to it, and that my RSS feeds has that VSTS feed added without me making any changes here. If I proceed further, now I'm on my staging system, and we'll run the same set of queries. We'll find again, modified date is there and VSTS is there. Let's go look at production in Azure. Now when I execute this the first time, we'll see that there is no modified date and modified by, and VSTS isn't there. That's because my release is still running. If I return to my release process, we'll see it's in progress. In a moment, this will turn green, and we'll realize that the deployment is complete. So we can see now that our release is completed. Let's go back and run our queries. If we return to Management Studio, we're still connected to our Azure database, our red production server. We rerun these queries, and we can see that modified date and modified by have been added to the users table, and my VSTS has been added to my reference table. Here's a complete look at how DevOps can work very smoothly without human intervention by taking that code that I built in development, moving it through the version control system, including a pull request, having a CI system that builds and tests my release, and then I can automatically have that deployed to multiple servers in an automated fashion without human intervention.